We're now going to hear from Dr. Frank Beard, who is a public health physician and heads up our section dealing with coverage, evaluation and surveillance. Frank is unique in NCIRS and actually having had some coalface experience in a public health unit and is currently an examiner for the Faculty of Public Health Medicine. And Frank is going to tell us about some of the recent work looking at BCG and its use in Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter and Ben. So I'm going to start off talking about the BCG vaccine, the history of its development, and then characteristics of the vaccine. Then I'm going to talk about immunisation policies, both overseas and in Australia, and some program related issues, particularly vaccine shortages. And then I'll finish with describing a recent evaluation that we did of Australian BCG immunisation programs, looking at aims, methods, results and conclusions of that evaluation. So the BCG, Bacille Calmette-Guérin vaccine is the oldest vaccine still used today. It's been around for more than 90 years. So it was developed by two French scientists, Monsieur Calmette and Monsieur Guérin. And more people have been given BCG to date than any other vaccine, so more than 3 billion. It's a live attenuated vaccine, so Calmette and Guérin took Mycobacterium bovis strain, which has been said is the species that causes TB in cows, and they cultured and passaged it 230 times over 13 years to reduce the virulence of the strain. Then they sent samples around the world, and so repeated passage in different laboratories under different conditions over many years has caused genetic divergence of the strains. In the 1960s, when lyophilization or freeze drying developed, that has largely slowed but not completely prevented divergence since then. And this is a figure showing the various genetic strains and how they've diverged over time. As you see, multiple different ones, BCG Russia, BCG Japan, etc. So the BCG is a relatively reactogenic vaccine. So local side effects are common, particularly injection site abscess and inflamed lymph nodes. Disseminated BCG infection is rare but potentially life-threatening and mainly occurs in immunocompromised people. And it's been documented that the different vaccine strains have different adverse event profiles. Efficacy, the clinical trials have shown quite a wide range of results in terms of protection against adult type pulmonary TB, ranging from no effect at all up to 80%, and meta-analyses have estimated overall effect of around 50% protection. As Ben said, there's strong evidence of much better protection against severe childhood disease, so more than 80% against TB, meningitis and miliary TB. The duration of protection from BCG is uncertain, so initially it was thought to be around 10 to 15 years, but more recent studies in some populations, including Native Americans, have shown considerably longer duration of protection, although with some gradual waning over time. And again, it's been documented that the different vaccine strains produce quite different immune responses. However, at this stage, it's unclear whether any particular vaccine strain is more effective. And it used to be thought that BCG didn't prevent infection, just progression to disease. However, the development of IGRA tests that Ben referred to has allowed studies to compare acquisition in vaccinated and unvaccinated infants, and they've confirmed that BCG does decrease the risk of infection, as well as decreasing the risk of progression to disease, and also reduces the risk that disease won't resolve with treatment. So non-specific effects of BCG vaccine are a particularly interesting area, and they've been known about for a long time. So BCG vaccine's been used for treatment of bladder cancer since the 1970s, and it remains the mainstay of therapy for superficial bladder cancer, that it directly inserted into the bladder, obviously not injected like we do for other uses of the vaccine. However, there's also been a range of studies that have showed that BCG appears to reduce all-cause mortality considerably greater than just from preventing TB disease. And this is a survival curve for children under up to 6 months of age, showing difference between BCG vaccinated children in red and showing the survival considerably higher than in unvaccinated children in blue. So this is from Guinea-Bissau. This is a cohort study, so there's potential for selection bias, and that children who are not vaccinated may be a higher prevalence of medical conditions, explaining why they weren't vaccinated. However, a number of randomised controlled trials have also been conducted and have shown similar effects, mainly in African settings. So WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts working group was convened a few years ago to look at non-specific effects of vaccines, and they reviewed all the evidence, all the trials and studies, and their conclusion was that the evidence is suggestive, not absolutely conclusive, of a beneficial effect of BCG in reducing all-cause mortality in the first year of life in countries with high childhood mortality, to start with. And they also concluded that it could save additional lives by just emphasising the existing recommendations that BCG dose be given as soon as possible after birth in countries with high prevalence of TB. So obviously there's a recommendation, there's benefits of preventing TB by having it early, and this potential reduction in all-cause mortality may be an added bonus. As with adverse events and immunogenicity, these non-specific effects may well vary by vaccine strain. However, little research funding has been committed to explore this, and some people suggest that this may be because BCG is viewed as an old vaccine. It is obviously an old vaccine, and most of the research funding is going towards new potential replacement vaccines for BCG, which there's a number of but don't have time to go into today. There's also potential non-specific effects of BCG in terms of reducing allergy. However, there is conflicting evidence in this space. And interestingly, there's a large NHMRC funded randomised controlled trial run out of Melbourne, which is be looking at the effect of BCG on allergy and infection. And that's called MISBEAR. In terms of cost effectiveness, Truns and others in a Lancet publication looked at the estimating the cost effectiveness of routine BCG programs in children under 5 years of age using 2002 global data. And they estimated that it cost about $6,000 US to prevent each case of severe TB which is obviously a relatively small amount of money. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they found that was most cost effective in low middle income countries with moderate to high TB incidence, and least cost effective in developed countries, so more in the range of $100,000 to $300,000 per case of severe TB prevented. So that data on effectiveness and cost effectiveness of BCG vaccine explain why BCG immunisation policies vary considerably in between different countries around the world. So this is a map showing past and present policies of routine vaccination by country. So the dark orange is countries which have never had a routine childhood vaccination program, and can see that that's largely North America. Countries in the blue, countries that used to have a routine vaccination policy but no longer do, just have targeted programs. You can see that includes Australia and most of Europe. And then the rest in the light orange are countries that have routine programs currently. But even in those developed countries which have targeted programs, the policies still differ quite markedly. So in the US, they use virtually no BCG. It's only recommended for children who have a negative MAN2 test and are continually exposed and can't be separated from adults who are either untreated or ineffectively treated, and the child can't be given long-term preventive treatment, or the adults that they're exposed to have resistant TB. In terms of healthcare workers, the US almost never uses BCG vaccine. So the US focus is largely on MAN2 screening and treatment of latent TB infection. Whereas in the United Kingdom, it's recommended for multiple groups, so all infants in areas of the UK with a TB incidence over 40 per 100,000. Also children aged under 16 years of age if their parent or grandparent was born in a high incidence area, contacts of respiratory TB cases, and anyone going to live for 3 months or more in a high incidence area. And also recommended as for occupationally exposed MAN2 negative individuals aged less than 35 years. So that includes not just healthcare workers, but prison staff and nursing home staff. So where is Australia in terms of policy? So we're pretty much on the fence. So the Australian guidelines, the Australian Immunisation Handbook and the National Tuberculosis Advisory Committee BCG guidelines recommend vaccination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander neonates living in high incidence areas, and that's at the moment just Queensland, the Northern Territory and northern parts of South Australia. So WA used to have a program, but they stopped it in 2007. Also, children, particularly those aged under 5 years, will be travelling to countries with incidence over 40 per 100,000 for an extended period. And neonates born to parents with leprosy or family history of leprosy, which is a relatively small number. So some vaccination program issues in Australia. So funding. The programs are funded individually by states and territories. It's not on the National Immunisation Program like most childhood vaccines are. It's difficult to get accurate coverage data for the vaccine. While it can be reported to the Australian Immunisation Register, it's unclear how well it's reported and the data aren't published. And supply issues. So there's only one Therapeutic Goods Administration registered product, a Sanofi product in Australia, and that's been unavailable since 2012. Various unregistered products have been used since then. And that access has been exacerbated by some critical global vaccine shortages, so which Ben referred to in a Lancet paper from last year. So these shortages have been were largely due to technical production difficulties in 2 of the 4 UNICEF suppliers, so the Statin Serum Institute in Denmark, which is recently privatised, and the Serum Institute of India in India. And I understand that those global shortages have now resolved with new contracts from the WHO. However, there's ongoing issues in Australia, so in terms of the impact of these shortages, prioritisation of clinic stocks has been required at various stages over the last few years, and that's caused access delays for patients. The unregistered products imported, the first one was a Danish product, and that was used from 2012 to 2015, and that was imported under Section 19A provisions of the Therapeutic Goods Administration Act, which allows for importation of drugs or vaccines from countries with a similar regulatory system to Australia. And so under those provisions, the vaccine can essentially be used very similarly to a registered product, and so providers would probably not have even noticed any difference when that was around. But then that became unavailable from late 2015. And since then, a Polish product and an Indian product have been imported by some states and territories. In New South Wales, they were initially using the Polish product, but are about to swap over, I understand, to the Indian product shortly. So both of these, the Polish and Indian products, both have considerably more onerous regulatory requirements. So the options for other options for dispensing these vaccines are special access scheme, which is a case-by-case basis for each patient and involves a fair bit of paperwork. So the patient has to sign that they're receiving an unregistered vaccine. Or the authorised prescriber scheme, which can allow supply by specific doctors, not nurses, which often give vaccines in BCG clinics, and that requires ethics approval. So both of those options create considerable logistic barriers for providers. So looking at the 2 products, the Polish product, it had a good manufacturing practice certificate that was recognised by the TGA. However, some considerable workplace health and safety issues were identified, or at least theoretical issues, and that the vaccine comes in glass vacuum ampoules, so there's this theoretical risk of aerosolization of the powder inside the ampoule when they're opened. And New South Wales Health advised that should only be opened in under a biocontainment hood or using personal protective equipment, including a N95 mask, eye protection, gloves and gown. And also the product information and label were in Polish. I understand that eventually the manufacturer did supply them in English. The Indian product, on the other hand, it had a GMP certificate. It wasn't recognised by the TGA, but it was had gone through the WHO pre-qualification process, which did increase confidence in the vaccine. It came in vials, not ampoules, which was good, and the product information and label were in English. So finishing with the evaluation that we conducted recently, so aiming to evaluate Australian programs with particular reference to implementation and consistency, and specific objectives of reviewing policy and practice at the national and jurisdictional level, assessing how the programs are implemented across different states and territories, specifically in regard to availability, accessibility and awareness, vaccine uptake, reporting of adverse events following immunisation, consistency between the state and territory programs and with national guidelines, and identifying strengths and challenges of the existing programs and recommendations to improve. So the methods we used, we reviewed national and jurisdictional BCG guidelines, surveyed key stakeholders in late 2015, and analysed data for the 2001 to 2014 period for BCG coverage from the Australian Childhood Immunisation Register, as it was called then, and adverse events from the TGA's Adverse Drug Reaction Scheme. Stakeholder interviews, we interviewed people from all jurisdictions except the ACT, and a range of stakeholders as seen there, mainly medical advisors and jurisdictional program managers and coordinators. Found substantial differences between national and jurisdictional guidelines. The main example of this was that Victoria recommends BCG for children under 5 years of age if they're living in a household with a person from a high incidence country. Consumer access to BCG vaccine also varies widely between jurisdictions. So several jurisdictions provide at regional and remote locations, although that's dependent on visits from accredited vaccine providers. Tasmania provides at regional locations, doesn't have any remote locations, and South Australia and Victoria only provide it in central major city locations. Barriers and challenges identified by the stakeholders, they virtually all said that the recurrent vaccine shortages had been major barriers to running the programs and promoting them. Also the multi-dose vials that BCG vaccine comes in with 10 to 20 doses reduces considerably the flexibility of scheduling clinics if you want to minimise wastage. And also maintaining appropriately trained and accredited staff, because the vaccine is injected intradermally, which requires specific training, and you require a MAN2 test if the children are, if individuals are over 6 months of age. The reported likelihood of entry into the immunisation register varied widely, from some jurisdictions saying always to some saying never. And the ACIR data also showed a wide variation in the percentage of non-Indigenous infants reported as receiving BCG. So for the 2014 data, that percentage varied from 0.2% in Tasmania to 5.4% in the Northern Territory, which suggests the significant difference in vaccine delivery and or underreporting to the register. There's also change in age distribution of doses over recent years, which could be due to vaccine shortages. So this figure shows proportion of BCG vaccinated children aged under 7 years, vaccinated at less than 3 months of age in blue, and less than 6 months of age in red, from 2001 to 2014, with years on the x-axis and percent on the y-axis. Adverse events following immunisation, so the total rate in children under 7 years of age was 90 per 100,000 doses, and serious adverse events 12 per 100,000 doses. And the adverse events rates did appear to increase from 2011 when unregistered vaccines were in use, so 160 per 100,000 doses in 2011 to 200 per 100,000 in 2014. However, need strong caution in interpreting any of the adverse events data, because they're small numbers. There's likely underreporting of both the adverse event data and the BCG vaccine coverage data. And there's also been a general increase in reporting of adverse events for other vaccines over this period. So conclusions, that there's inconsistent BCG supply and difference between the jurisdiction programs, and that's leading to low variable and inequitable vaccine delivery. If we could improve communication and access to the vaccine, this would potentially improve equity for at-risk children Australia-wide. However, there's considerable challenges in raising awareness. So we know from experience with other vaccines that targeted programs always achieve less coverage than universal programs. Here we've got target groups across multiple languages and cultures. It's not just migrants, it's any young children travelling to endemic areas for an extended time. And there's complex issues because it's a lot of countries involved. The definition of extended is unclear. And it's not just about improving awareness. As I've said, there's many challenges in improving access to the vaccine. So we concluded also that greater centralisation, such as, for example, through including the vaccine on the national program, could help facilitate such improvements. We certainly need better data on BCG coverage and adverse events to monitor program delivery and safety, particularly when we're ongoing use of unregistered vaccines. And we need some further work to find the target population size and distribution, because we're not clear of that at the moment, and we could use data on departures from Australia for overseas travel to help estimate that. And anyone who's more interested in more detail on our evaluation can look at our recent publication in Communicable Diseases Intelligence for more information.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Frank, for that's a very comprehensive presentation on BCG overall and the situation in Australia now.